Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from Portland, Oregon, USA. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests, interesting people like my viewers. And my guest this evening is a repeat guest. He's been on so many times, I forgot what I was supposed to say. Jimmie Moglia.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you again. Through the years, he's been on a number of times because he's so interesting and so sharp, and there's so many nice things about him, and they're all true. I promise you will see as we get into the subject of today's show, the 55th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs. The 55th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs. Boy, there's lots of thoughts around that. Yeah. And since you've been on a number of times before, I won't grill you about who you are personally, but I would ask you some certain questions because some people who will see this show and haven't seen the earlier interviews I've had with you, if that's okay.
What can I say?
How are you feeling right now?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. I usually have a Shakespearean answer to this type of question, so if you wish to have it, I'll gladly deliver it.
I'm sure you will.
I feel like a time to the year between the extremes of hot and cold, neither sad nor happy. So half-half, okay.
There's an example of what you're going to get for the rest of the hour. You're always a pleasure to have. So we'll do the first half or so of the show talking about who you are, because there'll be some people in Sri Lanka or Turkey who have not seen you before. You ready?
I am ready, yes.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Torino, which is Turin, Italy, northern Italy, northwest Italy, within earshot of the Alps, so to speak. Actually, not even so to speak. So to see, a long time ago. And I'm
How long ago, Jimmie?
You're taxing my store.
Okay.
They say age is a question of mind over matter, and if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. So we'll leave it at that.
That's fine enough with me. Why were you born?
Another question that I never asked my parents, although I remember I may have said at times, I didn't ask to be born, so that.
So you don't know why you were born?
No idea.
I know why.
To harass Dr. Don? No, not. Or the crew.
You're such a delightful person to visit with, and even though people aren't here to watch you in person, but they will appreciate your wit and your brilliance and the qualities about you that make you so deucedly interesting. That's why you were born.
I know not what to say.
That's a rare instance, huh? And anything significant about your national or cultural heritage that's worth repeating?
Worth repeating? Let's see. As I mentioned, I grew up in what it could be defined a Latin environment in Italy with a Catholic upbringing, which helped me to drift me or direct me to the other side in time. But I do not regret it because there is something to be said about certain values that somehow remain in time with, as far as the upbringing. So, and as I'm sure I said before, I grew up in a Latin environment, then moved to an Anglo-Saxon, or rather Catholic, moved to a mainly Protestant environment, which is interesting in the sense that it exposes to different ways of life and conceptions about life in general.
About how old were you when you moved from that one environment to the other, from the Catholic and Protestant?
I had started frequenting England when I was in my teens because of my second undeclared profession, which was a musician, and then when I finished my schooling rather, then I moved residence. So first I went to England, then to Canada, then the United States, and then back to Europe, England, and then back to the United States. So it was a rather contorted itinerary of locations, you could say.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes. I would say that to enjoy a move is is a bit of a masochistic statement, but the fact of having been exposed to, I would say, quite a number of cultures, because during my previous work, during my relatively speaking brief period past in the corporate life, my job involved traveling all the time, and so I was exposed to a number of different nationalities and cultures, and occasionally even languages. So it was an interesting experience as a whole. Yes.
How many languages do you speak?
I have a stock answer. I'm sorry. I speak Spanish to God, French to men, Italian to women, and the German to my horse.
So, which language do you speak to me? In English?
I hope so. although a pedantic academician may object, but I hope my English is adequate.
Do you belong to an organized religion now?
No.
No. Will you ever belong to one again?
The future is in the hands of the gods, but the probabilities of, I would say, is slim to minimal.
Yeah. How about your education, Jimmie?
I studied Greek and Latin when I was a youngster, and as I said before, I'm sure
Greek and Latin.
Yes, Greek for 5 years and Latin for 8, and that would not be a very advisable background in order to get a job. So I quickly discovered that, and so in order to extract myself from the family of those or the unemployed, I studied engineering and got a degree in electronic engineering, which allowed me to engage in this profession for a good number of years.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Any other education worth mentioning besides your formal university education?
I think like possibly most people who have got a degree somewhere, they probably learned much more after the degree than they ever did at school, and I consider myself as belonging to this particular crowd.
Uh-huh. How many degrees did you get?
One, but now in thinking about, if you want to pump up your curriculum, I say that based on what I studied in Italy and the additional self-education that I had to engage myself to, I think I've the equivalent of if not a degree, of sufficient knowledge in comparative literatures.
Yes. Somewhere along the way, you're going to tell us about your publications. A few words.
Yeah, I have 3 books published. One that your viewers who may have seen this interview before know about, which is Your Daily Shakespeare, which is a rather Bible-looking volume of Shakespearean quotation, but I always say it's a unique, useful, and unusual Shakespeare.
And it's very big.
And it's very big, and you also can use it, doubles as a paperweight if you don't want to use it. But the main characteristics or the main feature of this particular work is that although everybody knows Shakespeare and everybody may have heard every now and then a Shakespearean quotation, really the Shakespeare as a whole is a treasure trove of ways of getting away with it. And but it's very difficult. It's relatively difficult to locate the accurate quotation that you may wish to use in a conversation. Consequently, my dictionary resolved the problem quite simply, but it took 15 years to do it, and it lists all the quotation that can be used by situation. So if you have a situation, you have how to, I don't know, how to deal with an accountant, how to, or war, peace, approaches to people, character. There are about 200 different character types in that for which a suitable quotation applies, and because knowing what the quotation is the first step, but knowing how to remember it is the second larger hurdle. Then what each entries has the situation, the quote, suggestions of how to use, where and with whom, and also, I think very important, a description, a summary of the context in which the original quote appears, either in the play or the poem or the sonnet. So all this makes for a plus. There is an analytical index with more than 10,000 items. So it's very likely that whatever situation, or rather most situation that one may find in life, may come up with a quotation to use it.
15 years.
Only because I wasn't happy with the format. So I did it I did it all, and then almost at the end of it, I discovered that I wasn't happy with the format, because I said I wanted to be unusual, but I wanted to be unique, but I also, above all, I wanted it to be useful. Mm-hmm. So in order for it to be useful, I had to come up with a format that most people would agree that it was useful with. And so that was the reason for the 15 years.
So I've got your book here before me, and I'm going to look up something to use. How would I go about that?
You go at the analytical index, and I don't know. You want to pay a compliment
yes,
to a woman.
Yes, give us an example or two.
Then you go to compliments, and you compliments to girl, compliments to woman married, divorced. There wasn't divorce there, but you have a quite range of compliments that you could use.
And these are all addressed by Shakespeare.
Yes, and then you have situations of conflict, or situation of self-defense. I always like to quote. Always. There's a quote that comes to mind, although I'm not here in the mode of reciting Shakespeare for long.
Of course.
I could, but let's say that you say something nasty about me. I could answer back, offending you, or I could say, "Thy lips rot off," and so.
That's very inoffensive.
You see, but the fact that you laugh, it confirms the point. Because when you are insulted in an intelligent way, you either can write back, but then you don't. You probably, if you find a person that cannot understand the joke, you probably would not use it because it would be useless. But if you find a person that half understand the joke, then it's a way because you have diffused the situation. You see.
But the person that you're in conversation with has to have some knowledge or appreciation of what Shakespeare is about.
Which hopefully you have ascertained before delivering the insult.
Otherwise it's a little hello.
Yes. But amazingly, I don't know, because I don't use it, most of my days are spent on my own, so I don't have, except for my cat. I cannot use Shakespeare with my cat. But most people, or most of the quotations, overwhelming majority of the quotations listed in the dictionary, and by the way, I've always new ones. Since my first edition, I added 600 more. So, most of the quotations are understandable by just about anyone.
Oh yes.
And I would say the Old English has an inherent charge of humor associated with itself, because just the way of using thou, or way of using postponing, or rather inverting the negative clause after the verb and so forth, makes it for an amusing language by itself. So most people may not know it exactly Shakespeare, but understand the flavor of the statement or the quote and the intent.
What about your other publications? There were two others?
Yes. As a consequence, or rather as a trail on the Shakespeare book. The government of Tuscany, Italy, published my equivalent work for Dante's Divine Comedy, which is one of the world classics.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is out. And then my third published book is in Italian, and it's a counter-history of the United States.
Say that, the counter?
Counter-history of the United States.
Wow.
And I have more books because one of my side interests ever since I retired is the educational stuff. But it's only almost I would like to use it with other people, but I have to use it with myself because, as you probably know, unless you know someone somewhere in the establishment, quote unquote, people can treat you like dirt or as if you did not exist, irrespective of what you do. But I've come up with a software solution that I call it that combines or marries the printed page with the internet. So, for example,
a printed page with the internet.
With the internet. So,
whoa.
There's no second edition of the Shakespearean, your daily Shakespeare dictionary, but in this potential second edition, there will be codes, or it's called QR codes, on the side of the page, and passing the smartphone automatically you will be connected to both the quotation and the dictionary, how it is spelled, how it should be said, which is useful for foreign people, and also connected to a visual memory, I call it a mnemonic frame that allows you to remember quotes by heart.
Does your head ever hurt? I mean, just listening to you makes my head ache because you're detailed.
Only because I should speak more slowly. But one of the problems that we have is if I always have this quotation, do I remember by heart? No, most people know what to be or not to be, and that's it.
Sure.
But actually it is possible to remember many quotations, many by heart, even if I don't have, which I do not have, a great memory. So this is done through a system that I came up with and I published. So I remember hundreds of quotations by heart, even long ones, and it's not a question of posing or bragging about this. It's a very useful exercise because the memory is like a muscle, they say. And so the more you exercise this memory, it is fun to do it, the better it is for the memory itself, and also it enables you to use the quotations when they're
And
needed.
you're enjoying your life now, still pursuing this kind of activity in your retirement?
I've had a number of options, I have considered, not had. I considered a number of options. I'm still looking to do something, but I'll take it each day as it comes, one at a time, as they say.
Are you considering running for public office?
Me, I could not possibly ever be totally the negation of the public office, because I cannot pretend, you see. You have to be police, you have to pretend. He said, I say what I mean, which is probably the worst thing that you could do. I discovered that when I was working in a corporation. So I cannot say what I do not mean. So I'm completely disqualified for running any kind of public office.
So then, when you mention working, it seemed to be a sort of a negative response to your experiences in your working life, working for corporations. Why was that? Am I correct in that assumption?
I think you are correct in a way.
Yes.
But there's a difference between I'm using big words now, but there's a difference between accepting reality as it is, and so I have to deal with it somehow, hoping to escape from it without too many wounds, or complaining about it. I may complain within myself. I think it's a rotten system. I don't even know how people can live like that. But on the other hand, you have to live with what you have. You have to deal with the situation that one encounters, and therefore, I would say that you're right that my judgment may be actually negative, but not having been able to do anything about it, nor planning to do, nor hoping to do anything about it, one adjusts as best as he or she can.
So then, are you in the process now of figuring out what you can do about it so that people like yourself in working for corporations or working in industry will have a better experience than you've had?
I've given up. No, I'm not trying to be facetious. I've given up. It's impossible.
Do you have a partner? You mentioned your cat.
Yes.
Anybody else besides your cat?
Not really. It's my private, so to speak, private life. The reason I mentioned the cat is because my son found him, and so he brought home this particular cat. But I think, you see, I like all felines, you know, from the smallest to the biggest. Even Leonardo da Vinci's, you know, he said that even the smallest feline is a masterpiece.
Will you say that again? Even how you said Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes.
I can't say it again, the word.
Leonardo da Vinci. Yes.
Oh, I love it.
He was an interesting character. But anyway, the cat is in my opinion, is the epitome of the free thinker, you see.
Really?
And like most serious people, the cat has an instinctive sense of humor. So altogether we're getting along. He's very independent. She is actually.
An instinctive sense of humor in a cat. Say a few more words about that. How can you tell that a cat has a sense of humor?
We could make 2 programs about this.
We plan on it.
No, it just the position that I'm just thinking the position he assumes. Some of the ceremonial stuff the ceremonies that most cats are prone to perform. For example, to catch a mole and bring it to me as a gift. Here is a mole. I've done my job here. That's a very humorous.
Yeah.
and so forth. The way the cat interacts with other animals too, like, and so forth. We could say.
And you have 2 sons.
Yes, one is working here, is his business, and the other one at the moment is flying from Doha to Berlin, to Munich actually. If he's going to Berlin tomorrow, he went to Vietnam for a 10 days vacation. So, but he works in Berlin.
What's he do for a living?
He works with a high precision watch company. This is my Christmas gift. And it's an interesting setup. He works there as a marketing and internet bridge between the German company and the English-speaking world, although many people speak English in his company. But it's an interesting. I've discovered it just through him. There is a small town, Glaskütte, in East Germany, ex-East Germany. There was the core, the center, and the hub of high-precision watchmaking in Eastern Europe. So with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the fall, these companies, or this group of companies which were consolidated under a structure, they were bought by various private enterprises, and one of those is the one that William works for.
Does he enjoy his work?
Very much. And he likes Europe, he likes Germany, he studied in Germany, he likes the German language, the German people, so and it's one of those things that happen, you know, like at one point somebody finds his own call, so to speak.
Is he multilingual?
German and English, and German, yeah, because his work is in German now, he's writing. And he has a smattering of other languages, but unfortunately I did not speak a foreign language when he was growing up, so the fault is mine.
How about your son that's here, meaning here in Portland?
Yes, he with a friend, he opened a combination bar and a new type which he calls Chill and Fill, which is in North Lombard, and so far he's doing pretty well.
Very, very good. A couple more questions before we take a break and get to the 55th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs. And you're politically, we've asked you this before, you always manage to confound me with your response.
It's my habit, yes.
on the political continuum? Are you on left or right or center, off the edge or what?
I'm off the edge. I'm off the edge.
Which edge?
Probably you could say the radical edge of it, with some occasional occasional participation to some ideas which are either center or even right, because there is no right and wrong, completely right and wrong. So I tend to consider myself a radical thinker, so to speak.
Oh, yes, you are. And any persons from the past in your life that are passed away now, or they're still alive, that impressed you? That
of the person still alive, and I think I said before, it's amazing, but among the spectrum of people in the United States whom I know and whom I came to respect or disrespect, I put at the top of the list ex-President Jimmy Carter.
Really?
Because he, in my opinion, was probably, even with the little I know, with the little I think I know of American history, is probably at least in the last 100 years the best president this country has ever had.
Oh.
And the fact that he was, quote unquote, bumped out of office after one term tells you much about the political atmosphere that seems to reign in political circles, in political circles, yes.
You admire him.
Yes. During his presidency, there was no war launched, no bomb dropped, and no missile sent anywhere. So that was a pretty good record. No one else has done that before.
Any other human being alive or dead now that you admire?
I admire, of course, there
Shakespeare.
There are many people whom the list would be very long.
Of course.
Of personal people whom I remember. He's no longer here. It was a dentist who lived in, who had his profession, his office, in all places in Ashtabula, Ohio, and in Ohio.
Ashtabula, Ohio.
And I met him when I was a musician on a cruise in Europe. And we became friends, and with himself and his wife too. And so they enjoyed my company, I enjoyed theirs. So I took them through Europe, and because I was fresh from my classical studies, I was able to be a reasonable cicerone or cicerone or guide, whatever, for the various stuff that they were interested in. So it was a good friendship that they helped me when I got married here and in the first time. And so we maintained this friendship now. He's passed away, but still remember him fondly.
Are you available for another marriage? You never know where I'm coming from, Jimmy. You know me by now.
This type of questions is one. I don't know.
Of course. Well, I think it's time for us to take a break.
All right, sure.
And then we'll go back and talk about the subject of the show, the 55th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs. And I'm looking forward to that. Shall we take a break in there, Mr. E? Okay, looks like we're back, and I'm glad you didn't run away during the break. And if you missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don, it's an ongoing series of 1 hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And now we're going to talk about the 55th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs with Jimmie. So you ready?
I am, if you are.
Okay. Boy, that calls back a lot of memories from me, because I'm of an age when that made a real impression on me, all that was going on. So let's start with you. Why should we remember the Bay of Pigs invasion?
Okay, it's a matter of opinion. Okay, so this is my opinion.
And mine
Of
too.
course, that has to be said, although it's obvious, because otherwise you say, I'm going to pontificate about this and that. Well, I think that the Bay of Pigs was important for several reasons. First of all, historical, of course, because that was the first modern attempt after World War II to duplicate an invasion of Cuba that occurred 100 years before. And it was also the first of those attempt to subvert a country's political status on other grounds that the establishment in the country, in the United States, did not like it. So those are one of the reasons they should, because I don't know why it comes to mind, but the great historian Thucydides said, if you want to understand the present, you must know the antecedents. So this was, I would say, the milestone antecedent that can explain to some extent all that happened afterwards, with some minor exception. For example, the presidency of Jimmy Carter. But without exception, it can explain everything from Reagan, especially from Reagan downwards.
So the Bay of Pigs attempt was the beginning of a series of things that occurred after that. You can find some connection to what happened at the Bay of Pigs.
And it is also I would say, an anchor to which to attach other historical connected notions. For in the 1850s, I hope I'm not going to be too long, but anyway, in the 1850s, before the Civil War, actually, in the 1840s, in 1848, the United States declared war on Mexico. Declared war on Mexico, on spurious. It's like the weapons of mass destruction. There was no Saddam Hussein, but there was something else that made it invade him. So they invaded. The United States invaded the West and reached as far as down as Mexico. And there was a movement or a current in the Congress that wanted to annex Mexico. But they didn't. They were voted down simply because Mexico had already abolished slavery. So you could not go into Mexico and say, well, let's have slavery again. There would be too much. So plus there was a debate of the new country on the West, whether to keep it under slavery or not, whether make it a slave continent or not. So eventually they settled having California slave-free and New Mexico having slavery, but they happened in 1860, so it was just before the Civil War, so they didn't take advantage. But the need for slaves was still there. And although Cuba was occupied by Spain, they had formally abolished slavery also. But there was still a good flourishing trade with Cuba of slavery. So the powers that be at the time, the CIA, there was no CIA, of course.
CIA.
They organized a group of mercenaries led by a Spanish-sounding character by the name of Narciso Lopez. And they attempted an invasion of Canada. They were captured by the Spaniards. They were killed, they were executed, and that gave an excuse to say to one of the newspapers of the Gulf Coast to say, American blood has been spilled. They're actually mercenary, but doesn't matter. American blood, we have to conquer Cuba. Eventually they didn't, but or rather they did try, but they had to wait for another 30 years in order to invade properly, which was done with the, as you know, with the main, with the explosion of the main ship, of the main frigate, corvette. And most people do skip the attention of many, but in 1987 there was a report from somewhere Congress saying that the explosion on the board of the Maine was not caused by the Spaniards, but because the captain had put the explosive too close to the boilers.
Yes.
So so it's a duplication. The whole thing is a duplication, in a sense, more than one sense, of the type of activities that have occurred throughout the last 30 years, at least 30 years, which includes, for example, which includes the bombing of countries, of course.
I'm going to interrupt you because I'm looking at the clock, and we need to move ahead a little further.
Yes.
So that we can talk about how Fidel Castro came to power, and Cuba was independent and a communist state eventually, and then the Bay of Pigs.
Of course. It has been forgotten by many that Castro movement was an independence movement, not yet at the beginning tied up to any political or ideological association. But
he was a hero of mine at that time.
Oh, okay, but of course, one of the first thing that he did is he did expropriate the large land holding of what we call finance capital in Marxist terms. So this stirred a wasp of the nest of wasps in the United States, and so they became immediate enemies. At this point, he had no friends, and because the expropriation of large land holdings was essentially, you could call it a communist or a enterprise, then of course he had to look for friends, and so the friends that he looked for at the time was of course the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union at the time was a kind of beacon, ideological beacon for colonial states as well as Europe.
And he needed to have some help to stop the U.S. from overrunning him at that time.
Yes, and so he got some help from the Soviet Union from the respect. But then at this point, the United States decided to undertake one of their color revolutions, red with the blood of red, color revolution, so to speak, which was not really a color revolution. Doesn't apply because the mercenary force that invaded Cuba was really just an attempt to overcome the problem. I would say that
subvert the Cuban
Revolution. With the science of the afterthought, with the house of the after times, rather. It's easy to say it wasn't well planned, because some of the things that they had to admit that they did was somewhat ridiculous, like using planes with the camouflage with the different flags. And then they had to start the revolution. First the CIA, in this case, they established a base in Guatemala, where they had subverted the government a few years before. Then, from Guatemala, they set up another base in Nicaragua, from where they launched the assault.
Yes.
And so that was essentially an invasion. So at least I've answered the question.
But then Fidel and his band, the revolutionaries, were smart enough, to turn back the attempt by the CIA and the anti-Castro Cubans from taking over the island again.
Yes, as it happens, in all war events, there are some unforeseen circumstances that play in the hands of one or the other. So the invading force, the force of the mercenaries, attacked, and what they did not anticipate was that some of the planes that Castro had, they were old planes, but some of those were jet planes already. And so even if they had very few jet planes, they had quite a greater power than the other planes that the mercenaries had.
Yeah.
And that was one of the determining factor. And the other point was that from what it transpires, we have to believe what the historian, the official history says in this case. There was a naval American force several miles away or tens of miles away from the land.
Mm-hmm.
But when the mercenary asked for having additional either American planes or forces or a navy or something, Kennedy said no. And so
the CIA had planned to set up a situation where Kennedy would be forced to come in and have a full-fledged American invasion rather than a Mickey Mouse one put up by the CIA.
Exactly. And so the army did not intervene, and so the Cubans had sufficient time to organization to get back. There were people killed on both sides. It wasn't all that was easy even for the Cubans, but they were able to sustain the offensive and defend themselves.
I'm jumping ahead now. What do you think is going to happen to the Cuban Revolution with the lifting of sanctions and more troops that Americans are going over and things are loosening up? We're going to have a return to monopoly capitalism and casinos and all that kind of stuff.
The Batista regime,
Thank you.
Freedom and democracy. Yes, it's really hard to say. I would say that if we possibly were able to guess what goes into the mind of people that are in power, like Fidel Castro and his brother, I would say that Fidel Castro is probably very proud of what he achieved, even though he is not young. And in one of his articles that I read, this article was not published in the English press. But,
of course.
He said, President Obama came here. I'm trying to summarize it because it was a pretty long. Came here and told us that we should be friends now. We have reconciled. Forget the past, and so he said, according to what was expected out of his speech, most of us should sit down in order not to have a heart attack, because here we have the country as always being organism we shouldn't. But on the other hand, let's remind Obama that this happens after 60 years, where you killed hundreds of people, and a plane was brought down by a bomb. The guy is still in the United States, free,
yes.
Circulating free. You have strangled us economically. You've done everything possible to destroy us. And so, yes, we're glad that we're not fighting, but it is not something that we have to celebrate as something as your victory or our victory. It's something. And also, he said, we don't need your food. We are quite self-sufficient for food. And we're very proud of what we have achieved, which is to have eliminated analphabetism, to have give everybody a home, a job, and education and medical care. So, how this can stack up against the onslaught of what today is finance capitalism, which is a different phase from capitalism, I do not know. Nobody knows. We certainly hope that they can maintain some independence, but it's really hard because we don't read about it in the main media. But there is an attack on South America. There is on Venezuela, on Argentina, on Brazil, on Ecuador, to turn back the clock in different ways.
I'm afraid that they will still attempt with major effort to turn back the Cuban Revolution. They cannot stand to see another nation, especially so close to the U.S., that is truly independent and is not controlled and ruled by the ruling elite and the super rich and capitalism, monopoly capitalism.
I would agree with you with one minor exception.
Please.
You say they cannot tolerate one country so close to the United States. I would say they cannot tolerate any country, irrespective of where it is, that attempts its own way to independence. And I think I said in one of the programs before, I've worked in Iraq with my employer, and it was a country that had, I wouldn't say it's not on the level of Cuba because it's a different culture, it's Arabic culture and Muslim culture and everything else, but all this infrastructure was in place. Infrastructure of medical care, education, women, even if women with a skirt, not mini skirt as you would say in the United States, but with a skirt to the knee, which also were in Afghanistan, before they went in. The
At that time, huh?
So in Afghanistan, before Reagan sent in the Mujahideen, they even had a synagogue and girls going to school with the skirts and some. So it means that there is no toleration for any sort of independence from both ideological, but I really assume finance capital. Finance capital is the last stage of capitalism. Oh, no, imperialism is the last stage of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And imperialism derives, at least according to the Marxist economic theory, which has nothing to do with Marxism as intended by, in a derogatory sense. Finance capital must eventually rule the world, and we have evidence of this because these new TTIPs or these huge trade agreements are in effect the subversion of the parliamentary system by the multinational. So we've gone from competition capitalism to monopoly to finance capitalism. Now we have to imperialism, and finally, as I said, the subversion when finance capital takes over from the parliamentary democracy.
And what follows that?
World War III,
Revolution?
Maybe? I do not know. I think it's... I don't want to see it.
There has been revolution,
I think that
periodically.
at this point, if I were to put my bets, if there is a revolution in World War III, I would probably go for World War III. Not because I like it, but because of the infrastructure for a revolution is not there. Revolutions are very, very difficult. There have been let's call them three revolutions. I don't know how. There are three revolutions. There would be the French Revolution, which was a revolution of the bourgeoisie. It was not a revolution of the people. So much so that they found that everything was wrong with kings and nobles and priests, but there was nothing wrong with an emperor. So they said the revolution ended up with an emperor. There was one. The second one, let's talk about 1848, maybe no, but in 1871 in Paris, there was effectively a revolution similar to what happened in 1917 in Russia, except that there was no ideological infrastructure set up in the way that Lenin and other people had set it up at the time. So it was easy for the counter-revolution to squash with enormous slaughter, to the point that when the revolution occurred, the German army was outside Paris, was surrounding it. But at the point the Germans who had won the war with France decided to side with the counter-revolutionists to restore the old order.
And the name of this revolution? The name of this revolution you're talking about?
Or the Commune, the Paris Commune, the famous Paris Commune.
And year was it? What year was this?
1871.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the next revolution, really the only one, was the 1917 revolution, which was really a revolution with a capital R because it attempted to subvert the way the society works, turn it upside down. And so I don't think they have, and since then I haven't seen any, in my view anyway, any intellectual background or philosophical background or ideological background that can support a movement that eventually will be converted into action. See, this will be a very long conversation, but the Russian Revolution was prepared by 50 or 60 or 70 years of strong literature, ideology supported by the classics of Russian literature. So you can read some of the tenets of the revolution in those books.
What happened to the Russian Revolution? What happened to it?
But you know what happened. I mean, the Russian. Well, there were 3 years. There were 3 years.
The Soviet Union is gone.
Yeah, there were 3 years of civil war, and 14 European nations attempting desperately to destroy it. So there was 3-4 years of. Then they had a great difficulty because they had to organize everything from scratch, for one thing. and also under the constant threat of a counter-revolution, because that would take a long time. So I'm saying all this now because I remember it, but I made a series of 5 episodes on the life of Stalin, in which, by consulting various sources, I think that the most tenable view is that, ideologically speaking, the period has always been very difficult because in the 30s and after the first years after the World War II, because they were get afraid that if they even lightly deviate from the ideology that was set up at the beginning, they would have a counter-revolution of the right wings, so the whole thing would collapse. In other words, it was always on the brink of collapse until the mid-50s.
So there's not, we're talking about the end of empire.
But Russia was never imperialistic.
No.
Never imperialistic. The USSR was never imperialistic.
I'm thinking about now the American empire, and some would argue there is no such thing as an American empire. The evidence is overwhelming. A number of bases in America's dominating of the world's economies, and so many other ways of showing that America is an empire, and the ordinary citizenry is getting smart enough, just through the internet or whatever, that they're resisting. And there's 2 examples of that, the Trump supporters and the Bernie supporters. So people are smart enough where they're not smart enough to know who's really behind it, the super imperialists, the super rich. And this is the seeds of the death of the American empire and a real revolution. Well, then what will replace? I think that there will be a genuine revolt. The peasantry against the ruling elite, the super rich. But then what's going to happen after that?
I beg to disagree.
Okay.
I do not think that the conditions are ripe or ever will be ripe, because there is no ideological framework to support it. And so the idea of protesting, or the idea of Bernie Sanders to rant against the billionaires, it makes some people feel good because obviously it's grotesque. The inequality is grotesque, but there is no, that it cannot be done. You cannot kill them, certainly not. You cannot expropriate them because the legal means are not available. You cannot even change the finance capital structure or the banking structure because it's designed that they print money and give it to them. So lacking a ideological, a practical reference from which to start to think of a new system, everything else are words. It's a kind of good deed to say, well, yet words are no deeds, says Shakespeare. So there are words, but not because you want to put them down. No, but it's a question of fact. Even the Cuban Revolution was not an easy thing to do.
It's also a question of fact that there have been revolutions throughout history, and why should it stop with America? Empires disappear for one reason or another, and I can't tell you how it's going to happen, but
Yes,
I know it's got to happen based on history.
The only other empire that could have happened in 476, so there were no really empire collapses, many that we can think of. There were evolutions, yes.
Okay.
But after 476, which is the formal end of the Roman Empire, 476 AD, which was already crashing anyway along the way for a number of reasons, there have not been the next, I would say, epochal revolution was in 1917. So we had to wait for 1,800 years or whatever.
Remember the movie Patton?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, where he was at a place where a battle had been fought, and he said, "This is the place," and then his Jeep driver said, "No, it isn't." And Patton says, "Yes, I was here." He believed in reincarnation. And my question to you is, do you believe in reincarnation? Because you're talking rather authoritatively about that time in history.
You can talk authoritatively about history without believing in anything.
I know.
I'm just saying that history is the realm of opinions, even more than the present.
Sure.
So every historian, of which brings his own personality in it, his own views, etc. So I do see. I'm not saying to be pessimistic. Of course, if there's but I personally, I don't like to kill people. I wouldn't. I'm a revolutionary, but before I start going to get the gun and kill the rich, no. So there must be something different from what happened in 1917, but there is no framework, ideological framework that makes this possible at the time.
We're running out of time. You have any final thoughts or comments? We have to stop so abruptly because time is running out, Jimmie. So look at the camera and tell the viewers what you think right now.
What I think right now?
Yes.
After all these pessimistic considerations, I will end up with a Shakespearean quote, if you don't mind.
Of course, please.
What is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, nor woman either, though by your smiley you may seem to say so.
I wish I were as eloquent as that, but I talk New Orleans Creole and I can't speak as profoundly as you do.
But you've been a Shakespearean actor, you told me at one time.
Oh,
so.
yes.
So there you saw, we're not very far apart.
And 4 Shakespearean plays, and you're calling back memories. So anyhow, let's stop. Is there time for a public service announcement before Jimmie and I stop? Yes, and let the viewers see. Oh, yeah, to watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. There's hundreds of shows that I've done over the past 16 years where I've interviewed people like Jimmie and others and doctors and professors and pizza makers and whatever. Oh, and I got to tell you about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. The American civil liberties are in jeopardy nowadays, and we've got to protect them. Go to that website and learn more about the ACLU. Oh, and you get my shows broadcast by other stations around the country. Ask your local public access station to go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions there on how to get those stations to broadcast. We got to end corporate personhood. Yes, that Supreme Court decision saying that corporations are persons and money is speech is wrong. We got to amend the Constitution and say that isn't true. That's illegitimate. Well, thanks for watching. Remember KFC. I hope you enjoyed Jimmie as much as I have. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, enjoyable, be kind, be friendly, and enjoyable to you, and to you, and to you out there. Thanks again.